welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. I'm Jane Belau, and we're glad to welcome back one of our favorites. And I tried to get him to bring with him John Kasich, a presidential candidate, because he's a good friend of his, and I knew that they served in Congress together. And Tim Penny.
He's busy right now, so I couldn't get him to come to Minnesota to do your show.
Why am I surprised?
But if he comes to Minnesota, I'll do my best to get him into your studio.
Okay, well, just tell us a little bit that you know about working with him in the Congress. He lets everybody know he was there.
Yeah,
but there's nobody around that's speaking to him.
Yeah, John and I went to Congress together in 1982. We were both very young. We were 30 years old when we went to Congress. He on the Republican side of the aisle and I on the Democratic side. But over the course of the time that we spent there together, we began to work very closely on budget or fiscal issues, actually offering in my last year in the Congress a serious package of spending reductions that would have put us on a path to a balanced budget much sooner than we otherwise would have been. And he was my partner in that effort. It was the Penny-Kasich budget package, and it came within 4 votes of passing. But I've often said sometimes even when you lose, you win. And in this case, because we came so close, sort of fighting the powerful committee chairman and the interest groups, it essentially put the fear of God into the Washington establishment. And within a few years after I came home, John stayed. He became the Budget Committee chairman, and he worked with President Clinton and other leaders in Congress to put together the first balanced budget in decades. And so he's got a history of working in a bipartisan way, and he also has a history of getting things done. After 10 years out of politics, he came back to be governor of Ohio and took, I think, about a $5 or an $8 billion deficit and turned it into a $2 billion surplus within 4 or 5 years' time. So he knows how to lead, and he knows how to get things done.
Would you think that he would make a good president?
I think so, because he's willing to work with anyone that's willing to come to the table. So I think that really distinguishes him as the kind of leader that we need in the country today. In Ohio, he brought people together to fix the school system in Cleveland, and that required bipartisan support. He worked with legislative leaders in both parties to invest more in infrastructure. They did eliminate an awful lot of regulations in Ohio. They created in the last 5 years 400,000 private sector jobs in Ohio, one of the fastest job creation rates in the nation. So he's done a lot of things to work in a collaborative way to make things happen, and I think you'll bring the same kind of leadership to Washington.
When the leadership picked a candidate to defeat Mr. Trump, why didn't they pick
Why didn't they pick him?
Yeah.
Well, because he was too far behind. And here's what this is all about a delegate count, and you need, I think, like 1,238 delegates to win the nomination at the Republican convention. Trump is now at, I believe, 385. Cruz is now at 300. Rubio is at like 150. John came in second in New Hampshire, but other than that, he hadn't been picking up a lot of delegates anywhere, and he's still only, despite some other delegate wins in other states, he's still down at about 30, 40 delegates. So he has a long way to go. And I think that's why when there was a determined effort to stop Trump, they kind of looked around for others, and it looked as if Rubio was the one that they first began to sort of turn to. But I think John might get a second wind here. He's going to do very well in Michigan. In fact, he could win Michigan, and if he does win Michigan, that begins to turn things around, because there alone he's going to pick up 50 or more delegates. Then his own state of Ohio votes on Tuesday, March 15th, and if he picks up Ohio, as he should, that's another 66 delegates. So pretty soon he's right in there with the rest of them, and I think that may position him well for the rest of the race.
See, he didn't even.
So I didn't
if he
come on
even-
here expecting to be a political commentator.
Well,
But-
just for a few minutes, we'll go right to the foundation. All right, but if they had given him the same help they started to give Rubio and then Cruz,
Well, you
he
may be
would have
right.
he would have been ahead.
Yeah, you may be right, but bear in mind that several weeks ago, there were still 10, 12 candidates running. And I think it was difficult at that stage with somebody as prominent as Jeb Bush still in the race. It was difficult for those that aren't supportive of Trump to sort of zero in on just one alternative, because there were several viable alternatives, including my friend John at that point. So
Well,
now it's
we'll
down
watch.
to 4, and here's the fun thing. The debate last week was the first time that they only had 4 candidates on the stage: Trump, Cruz, Rubio,
was very
and Kasich.
impressive.
And he was very impressive. And it's because when you're not competing against 7, 8, 9 other candidates and you're getting just a snippet of time to tell your story, he now had 1/4 of the time to explain who he was, what his views were, what his policy prescriptions were, and I think he came through that debate looking really, really strong.
Well, thank you.
So we finally
For
got
a
a chance to hear him.
Yeah, for a first-person account of working with him
Yeah.
in Washington, and what he says is
People
true.
like him. In
Yeah.
Ohio, he won re-election with almost a 2-to-1 margin, and he carried all but 2 counties in the entire state. You know, the more Ohio got to know him, the more they liked him. And that's a swing state that could go either way, but he got like 64% of the vote when he ran for re-election. And I think that's evidence that he's the kind of leader that people can trust, and people see him as genuine. And the more they see him, the more they like him.
Michigan will give the first start, right, this week?
What's that again?
Michigan?
Michigan will come up, what is today, Monday? It'll be
Tuesday.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, tomorrow will be a big test for
No.
John, because if he can actually win in Michigan, I think that begins to move the needle in his direction.
I'm going to ask you a question. I already know the answer, but our viewers don't. If he gets to be president, what can he offer you that will bring you back to Washington?
Nothing, but he can offer me sort of his private phone line so that he and I can continue to talk as friends. But I don't want to go back to Washington in
Okay.
any capacity.
I keep asking.
Yeah, I mean, people say we'll never say never. There are cabinet positions that could be very appealing. There are other good people he can pick to help him run the government. But I think everybody needs some friends that aren't in the thick of the political mess with you. And I'd much rather stay home in Minnesota and be a long-distance friend.
I would too. Besides, Minnesota needs you.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm loving what I do in Minnesota. Running
Okay.
the Southern Minnesota Foundation
Now we'll
is
put
where my heart is at.
Politics way over here.
Please.
And let's talk about Southern
Not that I
Minnesota.
mind talking about John, because he is a good friend,
No.
but
Well, I expect you to bring him next time.
I'll see what I can do.
All right, the foundation.
We've got a lot going on this year. Actually, last Friday, we held a Prosperity Initiative seminar or conference right here in Rochester at the Rochester Area Foundation. We pulled this event together with a number of other partners: the SBDCs, the community colleges, the workforce development councils, and the diversity councils from across the southern part of the state. And this is based on some funding that our foundation received from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And they provided us these dollars to see if we couldn't orchestrate a series of meetings in our part of the state to help new immigrant and minority entrepreneurs access the resources they need so they can succeed. And so we're now in the process of learning more about what those unique and special needs might be. And at the event on Friday, I was able to announce the selection of 10 minority business owners from across southern Minnesota, a few from here in Rochester, that'll go through a mentoring program to help them with whatever business needs they might have to kind of help them be the best they can be and be as profitable as they can be. And we'll hold other sessions like this over the next year or more, and we will select another group of 10, I believe, next fall, who will then get that same kind of business mentoring. So it's an exciting initiative, and there'll be more to tell later. Right now it's just getting underway, but we're very pleased because a lot of our new immigrants are really very entrepreneurial. And yet I think when you look at the network of programs, the SBDC, the SBA, some of these other government programs, they're not really sure how to navigate these systems that we have in place.
Barriers.
And so we're trying to figure out as a foundation and with our partners like these government entities, what are some of the unique needs that maybe we're not currently meeting, and how can we better align our programs to help this new immigrant and minority population succeed in an entrepreneurial fashion.
Now the foundation is almost as old as you are.
Yeah,
it's turning 30.
Yeah, the 30-year anniversary is going to be celebrated throughout the year. If you go to our webpage, you'll see stories from some of our earlier leaders, our early loan clients, some of the program participants in our AmeriCorps program, others that will sort of tout their experience with programs and activities of the foundation over these past 3 decades. But as I've told you in previous programs, the Initiative Foundation came into existence in the middle of the 1980s when we were experiencing the farm crisis. And we lost tens of thousands of farmers across the state. All of our farming communities suffered dramatically. Many main streets never really came back after that farm crisis. And so this foundation came into existence with an initial grant from the McKnight Foundation in order to be helpful to the region in terms of finding a new economic path. So today what we do are 3 things. We help small towns create community funds so they can invest in their own future. We invest $1.5 to $2 million of resources every year into early childhood because those needs are great. But on the other hand, and here's the reason we do it, you get these young children ready for kindergarten. They'll succeed thereafter. They'll be stronger members of our workforce. And then the third thing we do is the entrepreneurial stuff, largely through business lending, but also through programs like the Prosperity Initiative, where we're trying to grow the new businesses that will provide the future jobs in our region. So that's what we do, but it all started 30 years ago, and so it'll culminate on October 12th, I believe, when we have our annual luncheon, which will be our 30th birthday celebration.
When we lost all those farmers, who took their land?
Larger farmers, for the most part. Neighbors that were not in financial difficulty were then able to come in and buy up a lot of these farms that went on the auction block. It's a tragedy. It's a sad thing that we lost virtually an entire generation of farmers during that.
And implement dealers.
That washout, yes, and it affected all of our small towns because for the most part, all across the 20-county region that we serve here, but more broadly across all of farm country in the upper Midwest, we lost a lot of our younger farmers because they tended to be the most highly indebted farmers. Yeah. And it's sad we can't undo it, and now farms are much, much larger than they were back in those days. And I know to some degree farms would have grown in size in any event, but that really accelerated the size of farming operations because we lost so many early stage farmers who were typically farming smaller plots of land, a few hundred acres.
And the implement dealers just
in the small towns took a heavy hit because virtually every small town was primarily reliant on the farm economy for their own prosperity. So we still have a lot of small towns that are sort of struggling because of that downturn in agriculture. But we have others that have sort of found a new economic future. If you look at Lanesboro with its touristy attractions, and I could name other towns, but that's just one example. That's a piece of what we're trying to do with our foundation's resources, is to help the smaller towns in our region find their new economy. And part of that is the Prosperity Initiative with new immigrants and minority members who have an entrepreneurial spirit are trying to create businesses here in our part of the state. Part of it is inviting new residents to our rural communities with our information technology economy. You can have a lot of professions and businesses that are run out of a home anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the metro area, so why not here? And we've already funded a brain gain project in Fairmont in Martin County to help them sort of market, why not? Why not come to our county? Why not come to our communities? And if you have that kind of a business that can be run essentially from your home, why not here in a small town with all the quality of life benefits of a small town? And so we're looking at other ways that we can invest in the resurgence of our smaller towns, and that's one of the reasons we now have 24 small towns for whom we help manage a community fund. Because that's a way of helping them take local resources and invest in their own future.
The actual birthday, is that going to be your annual meeting?
Yeah, we're going to celebrate it at our annual meeting in Rochester. I shouldn't say Rochester, in Owatonna.
Oh, I like Rochester.
Yeah, well, we have moved our annual meeting around a little bit over the years, but Owatonna, where our office is located, is really geographically center to the entire 20-county region. And so for quite a few years now, we've held our annual luncheon there in Owatonna, and we'll do that again this year for our 30th. But I think we're also, after the luncheon, going to have an open house, and then maybe even later in the afternoon into the early evening, sort of an opportunity for community members just to come and walk through. We'll probably have some historic displays and that sort of thing. So the day is still in the planning stage, but those are some of the things you can look forward to. And we'll have a cake, of course, with 30 candles.
You have a new round of grants that you're going to.
We do. Every spring and fall, we do a grant round where we issue a number of grants, either in the realm of economic development or early childhood, which are our two big program areas. And we try to fund new initiatives or expansions of existing initiatives. And that's why we call these grants incentive grants. They're not meant to be ongoing annual grants. They're startup grants, basically, to get something new started. And so that grant round is open now, and you can go to our website, www.smifoundation.org, or you can Google Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation. It'll take you to our website. And the grant application will be there, but the deadline is March 21, so we're like 2 weeks out from the grant application deadline. And you can get up to $20,000 per grant. And after those applications come in, we'll have a grant committee review the applications, and then members of the committee will do site visits just to better understand how you intend to use these dollars to either create or enhance an economic development activity in your town or an early childhood activity in your town, and then shortly thereafter we'll make the announcement. But last year we did, in total, I believe, 16 grants during those two rounds, and we issued $261,000. So this time around we're going to do at least $100,000, assuming the grant requests are A1.
So your main goal in this round, is it early childhood?
No, it's both early childhood and economic development, but it
Okay.
has to be an initiative that is either a new idea, a new activity or program that you'd like to begin in your community, or an expansion of an existing activity.
Okay.
So think about it in those terms.
All right. I hope you wrote down the criteria, because the 21st of March, who did they send this to?
Just send it to our office, and you can do it online. And the criteria for the grants, if you need more detail than I've just provided to understand just would this kind of activity qualify, the criteria will be at the website along with the application form.
Okay. And the website is?
And the website again, www.smifoundation.org.
Okay, now you heard it from him, and there's money there if you can use it, if you need it, and if it's a quality application.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, and there's one other activity that I'll mention that's going on right now. We pulled together community leaders from a number of the towns in and around Rochester to talk about what the DMC growth might mean to the broader region. And that resulted in a series of meetings on the part of community leaders all across our 20-county region. And that is going to culminate in some projects. And right now, there's a steering committee that's reviewing the project ideas, and those recommendations will come back to us within the next month or so.
Like
And,
what?
well, we don't know yet, because it's really growing up from the grassroots. The project ideas, I believe, were brought forward last week or the week before, and they're now sort of fleshing out those ideas, and there's going to be one more meeting in which they will try to make a determination of which project ideas, with a modest grant, maybe up to $5,000, could help to address a workforce or economic development need in our region. So this is a separate grant process that's kind of self-contained, but it has grown out of a series of community meetings with a lot of local leaders all across southern Minnesota that have participated.
Is this outside of Rochester? Or
All of
included?
these would be outside of Rochester, but the projects could have benefit to the entire region, inclusive of Rochester.
Okay.
So I can't even tell you what the project ideas are yet, because there's a steering committee of this Southeastern
great
Minnesota
idea,
Together
though.
group that's finalizing these recommendations, and we'll be looking at those within a few weeks.
Will the DMCC board or
No, they
the
won't have a
EDM
role in this.
Okay.
They don't have a role in this, but I'm very close to Lisa Clark, who runs the DMC activity, and she's actually on our board of directors. And I'm very close to Gary Smith and Heather Holmes at Rochester Area Economic Development and their Journey to Growth project. And we're making sure that the work of this group, the Southeastern Minnesota Together group, is well coordinated with the same work that's going on either through DMC or through the Journey to Growth initiative.
You don't
Because
belong.
we're all about collaboration, and we want to get people to work together.
You don't belong in Washington, and we need you in this area because you're so familiar with all the people and the different organizations and the importance of collaboration.
Well, it's the best way to get things done. And the sum can be greater than the parts when we collaborate, and that's what I like about our work at the foundation.
That is good. Okay, so when are you going to talk about those? One more meeting, you said?
Well, if you have me back here, and you
Quarterly.
usually get me back here every 3 months, I'll be able to announce which of these
Okay.
grant projects are going forward. And again, the application deadline is in 2 weeks. And which of those Southeastern Minnesota Together projects are funded. So I'll have something to report at the next interview.
Is that it now?
I think that's all I've got from the
Now
foundation.
we'll turn you back into a commentator. Let's talk about health care. Because a lot of legislation to repeal Obamacare. And a number of the candidates say, you've got to get rid of this, it's costing us too much. It's what you said in the first place, that it was going to cost too much and it's very hard to design. But what's going to happen?
Well, I think it really does hinge on the election. If a Republican is elected president, there's no doubt that there will be changes to the Obamacare program. If, let's say, Hillary Clinton is elected, less likely. It will probably muddle along as we have the last few years, just cutting and pasting and trying to make it work as best we can. But we are beginning to run into serious financial problems for the Obamacare program. And part of that is due to the fact that when Congress worked with Obama to pass a tax bill last year, they repealed some of the revenue that is dedicated to funding the Affordable Care Act, which then makes the Affordable Care Act not so affordable. And if we continue to go down the path of keeping the program in place but cutting the funding for the program, we're going to be in big trouble. And as we've talked about repeatedly, we've already got financial stress on the Medicare program and financial stress on the Social Security program. And now if we have another entitlement program that's underfunded, something has to change. So I think even if a Democrat wins the White House and therefore tries to carry forward the essence of the Affordable Care Act, they're going to have to address some of these fiscal pressures because we're running short of the money we need to pay for the promise that was made in that law.
Okay, the one question that none of the candidates have really looked at, and I'm going to ask you because I think you're smarter than most of them, and that is, look at this deficit. How many
No
trillion
one's really
dollars?
talking about it, except in very broad terms, like it's a bad thing. But here's one way of looking at the solution, not the solutions, but the way the budget is being addressed by candidates on the trail. On the left extreme, you've got Bernie Sanders, who has proposed over the next decade $15 trillion in tax increases. Well, our annual budget is $4 trillion. So a $15 trillion tax increase is like $1.5 trillion a year. That's like a 30% tax increase. Now, he will say it's only on the rich, so don't worry. But I've often said, are there really that many rich people that they can pay for everything? And the other problem is that virtually all of that new money, that new tax revenue, is spent. So it doesn't do anything about our deficit. It doesn't do anything about our debt. On the farther right extreme, you have Donald Trump proposing a tax cut plan, in spite of the fact that we currently have a $400 or $500 billion deficit, which the Congressional Budget Office predicts will grow to about $1 trillion and won't get any smaller going forward. But he's promising a tax cut of $12 trillion. And only a handful of puny little spending cuts. So in both cases, you know, you've got a rather dramatic proposals, neither of which, on the left or the right, do anything to address the problem you've just mentioned, and that's a growing national debt.
You got to solve that before you can strengthen your military?
I think you do. I think you have to solve the fiscal problem because at some point, just interest on our $19 trillion national debt is going to eat us alive. You know, we're very lucky right now because about a third of this debt is being paid for by the Federal Reserve Board. They basically printed money and bought the debt. So there's really no interest on it. But when we get to the real world and we have to start paying interest on our national debt, then a roughly $400 billion annual interest payment becomes $600 billion, $800 billion. Pretty soon it becomes the biggest item in the federal budget. That's not a happy circumstance because those dollars have to be repaid first before we can do anything else. So interest on the debt may become a driver of the debt as we go forward because we'll basically have to borrow money to pay off the debt.
So what would you do?
Well, first of all, I think you need a fiscal commission because we have to get this out of the traditional process where the president proposes a budget, everybody ignores it, Congress passes a budget, the president vetoes it, you know, and then so we just cut and paste again and just hobble along with short-term fixes. I think you need a high-level commission, very much the way we did Social Security 30 years ago, where the president places some very prominent administration officials on that commission. The Democratic and Republican leaders in both the House and the Senate do the same, and then we agree that we're all going to join hands and support the recommendations when they come forward, because there's some tough stuff that needs to be done here, both in revenue and in spending restraint, and neither party will do this on their own. It has to be bipartisan so that there's political cover for all concerned, so that when the tough decisions are made, we don't just have a political bloodbath as everyone blames one another for the solution. But the really difficult stuff has to be done in a bipartisan way, and I think on something like Social Security reform, like Medicare reform, like balancing the budget, you have to set it up with essentially a blue ribbon commission that all the key parties are willing to embrace and support.
Why hasn't anybody proposed that? Haven't thought of it?
We'll see. No, it's been thought of. In fact, Obama did have a commission of that sort. It's the commission that Simpson and Bowles, a retired Republican senator and a retired chief of staff for Clinton, put together. But Obama walked away from his own commission. And so we've now lost several years of time because the last attempt at a commission approach did not secure the support of the very person that created the commission.
All right, Tim Penny, thank you. We're at the end of 30 minutes, and we look forward to having you back again.
I'll be back next quarter.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you,
Thank
Tim
you.
Penny. Thank you, our viewers, for being with us this week. We'll be with you again next week, same time, same channel, 181 on Spectrum Communications. Take care, have a good week, and have a good night.